In this video, I'm going to show you why growing and monetizing your podcast now is the biggest opportunity of the decade. And I'm of course also going to show you how to do exactly that. For those who don't know me, my name is Guillaume Jouvencel. I'm the co-founder of GHA Marketing, and for the last 2 years, I have helped grow and monetize more than 100 podcasts. I have also 2 podcasts myself, Corporate Treasury 101 and Podcast Gurus, that generate respectively $9,462 and $10,936 in monthly sales, without getting millions of downloads a month. All right, let's get into it. So starting a podcast now is the equivalent of launching a blog in 2004 or buying Bitcoin in 2012. And here is why. There are 1 billion blogs online, or 1 per 8 people. There are only 4.2 million podcasts in the world. 1 for every 1,900 people. And on top of that, the market is still wide open. The demand for podcasts is huge, but the supply is much lower than you think. Even if it seems that everyone has its own podcast these days, especially in niches. And if you need proof, here is what Google Trend has to say when we compare podcast searches to blog searches. The image is by MP Digital, by the way. Now, here are a few other stats that you might not be aware of. In February 2025, YouTube claimed 1 billion monthly podcast users. Spotify also claimed 100 million monthly listeners to podcasts in September 2023. Now, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, the 2 biggest apps used to listen to podcasts, are not really transparent on their stats, but that's the one that we could fetch that is the most recent for Spotify. And on top of that, Spotify had a record-breaking Q1 in 2025 where it paid $100 million to podcasters. Companies are taking more and more interest into podcast advertising as well. And when you think about the global podcast advertising budget in 2024, we are close to 4.2 billion in US dollars. The growth rate of podcast ad revenues is estimated somewhere between the 20 and 30% year on year. Podcast ad revenue is also growing at an average of 20 to 30% annually. And this is driven by multiple factors. Better attribution with pixel tracking and DAI, the rise of host-read native ads, and niche targeting and higher listeners' trust. The audience is here and the money is here, but most podcasters approach their podcast wrong. They publish countless amounts of episodes, sometimes for years, without getting any results and can't explain why. And trust me, I would know I'm talking to an average of 500 podcasters each and every year. Now, here are some of the biggest reasons why podcasters are not getting any traction. Number 1, they didn't select a specific niche. Number 2, they are not researching what type of content it is that this specific niche is currently looking for online. They just publish content that, they think is good or that they like. They never look at the stats nor how to improve it. And that's something that I hear so many times in conversations with podcasters. When I ask, okay, so how many downloads do you get per month and what's your retention rate? They are incapable of answering me, and some of them don't even know where to look. Number 4, they don't market their podcast. And I mean really marketing it. We're gonna see more about this in a few minutes. And 5, they don't know how to monetize it. So they don't know what to look for and what to optimize for. Now, here is how to grow a podcast. The biggest recommendation I can give you is select a niche. There are so many podcasters talking about everyday stuff or having amazing conversations with everyday people, but this doesn't get traction. And on top of that, there are already a gazillion podcasts with exactly the same approach. Choose a niche and focus on it, and ideally choose a niche where the audience has a high purchasing power. But that's for another video. Then do a real content research. And by this, I mean look thoroughly at what is it that this ideal audience, this niche is currently looking for on internet, so that you can position your content accordingly, as well as your expertise that you can develop along the way. So how to actually look at this? You can look at a bunch of tools like answerthepublic.com, Google Trends, Google Keywords Planner, social media trends, Reddit communities, Quora forums, YouTube videos as well. You will see what is it that people are looking for right now in a specific niche, what are the queries that they are typing, what is it that they are asking questions about on Reddit and Quora. This is how you really grasp what type of content you need to be releasing. Then make sure that your podcast is discoverable. So first of all, you need to select the right categories to rank in for Apple Podcasts and Spotify, right? You also want to make sure that it is optimized for SEO. You want to make sure that when somebody types something about how to cook a pizza dough, I'm just throwing something random out there, they find your podcast and not someone else's. Because most of the time people will call their podcast around a brand, right? That doesn't mean anything specific, but then you need to optimize the title, also the show description and the show notes for SEO, so that when people search something specific without typing in the name of your podcast, they find you and not somebody else. Discoverability is key to grow organically. Of course, good audio and video quality. So we are talking about the audio only format initially. So without good audio, you're doomed. You can purchase literally a $30 microphone on Amazon. This is what I'm using right now and have a very crisp audio. If you don't, or if you can't, or if your guests don't have the right quality of audio, then you need a good audio engineer to mix the sound properly and to enhance the audio as much as possible. This is something that we typically do. And last but not least, for video. So you don't need a 4K camera to begin with. Just like an iPhone camera does the job, this is literally what I'm recording on right now, 1080p, and that does the job. This allows you to be present on YouTube, but also on Spotify. This will allow you to extract snippets for social media, which is among my next points. Then you need to market your podcast. What do I mean by that? People don't understand how much you can get out of a video episode. Here is how much you can do and how much you should be marketing your podcast if you really want it to ramp up. First off is obviously an audio episode, right? That is going to be distributed on all the podcast platforms. Then you have the video episode. So many podcasters overlook YouTube whilst it has the biggest audience out there. If anything, YouTube's audience is larger than Apple Podcasts and Spotify combined. So if you're not recording with video and not publishing on YouTube, you must. Then you can write an SEO optimized article for your website or for your blog because, hey, guess what? There is still a big reading audience out there. So why not transforming your audio content into written content by having the right process and transforming it into a readable, valuable piece of written content. By the way, here I don't mean a transcript or just the show notes of the episode, because when's the last time that you Googled something and that Google proposed you a transcript of a video of a podcast episode? I'm gonna guess this is never, because Google knows nobody reads transcripts. Nobody spends time on the page with transcripts, so they don't propose it as a search result. Nor should you put it on your page. You want a readable, valuable piece of written content, which is usually an article. Then you need to extract 3 snippets minimum of less than a minute from each and every episode, where you select the most valuable piece of content, educational or ideally a bit controversial, that you're going to be transforming into snippets for the 6 main social media platforms. That's 18 pieces of content for each and every episode that you put out. And with the 6 social media platforms, I mean LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube Short, Twitter /X, and TikTok. You can also do a trailer, right, which is a nice 1 minute 30 clip out of the episode that you select 5-10-second snippets out of, and that you transform into a nice teaser with cliffhangers. This is something that we typically do, but that you can put out, and people love to reshare this, especially the guests. And 6th, an email newsletter. Like if you have an email list, tell them about your new episode and summarize in a few bullet points what you discussed in the episode so they can get value out of it. And if they want to find out more, they just have to click the link in the email, which is towards the episode, guaranteeing a certain amount of downloads. Then next, you need to share all those assets with the guest, because if those assets are good and if they're happy to have come on the show, then guess what? They will reshare this episode. And if you share the most valuable pieces of content that they can use themselves to say, hey, I've appeared on this podcast and look at this is what I say in this episode. If you want the full conversation, just tune in using this link. And all of a sudden you tap into your guest audience, which is, by the way, your ideal audience, because you're interviewing experts and influencers within your very niche. And last but certainly not least, the biggest factor of growth. Big guest. At the end of the day, that's the best way to grow your podcast. If you invite big time guests on your show, they have their own audience, people will want to listen to them, so they will come and tune into your podcast, and you will keep and retain some of those on your show. Now, how to invite big time guests on your podcast? Well, it needs to be worth their time, right? So what you typically want to do is to guest up, in the sense of like you invite bigger and bigger guests as you go, but also having a highly end-produced podcast is attractive to influencers and guests, right? Because they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to come on this show. It's going to go on YouTube, on social medias, on LinkedIn, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and so on and so forth. And this is more valuable to them. You don't necessarily need a big audience. We have like big time company reaching out to us to be on our podcast, Corporate Treasury 101, without us having tons and tons of downloads. But because we've created a brand and they know that they will have an insightful conversation that they will be able to leverage to their own audience, this is valuable to them. If you do all this, I guarantee that your podcast will grow because you're just not leaving it to chance. You're leaving it to data. What is it that people are looking for? You're making sure that people find your podcast, that they listen till the end, and that your podcast is reaching more and more people at each and every new episode through the marketing and the guest. If you do this, I guarantee you will have a growing podcast. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, but that is a lot of work. Well, welcome to the world of professional podcasting. It is indeed lots of work that you might not have the time or the money for, but then ask yourself this: how much time have you put into your podcast without seeing any significant results, and is it time for a change? Now, I'm gonna put the cherry on the cake here. It might be much more incentivizing for you if your podcast was monetized. So here is how to monetize your podcast, and I mean really monetize your podcast. Basically, you have 4 main ways of monetizing your podcast, and in order of preference, from the least preferred to the most preferred on my side, here they are. So the first one is advertising, right? So if you're using any platform like Spotify for Podcaster, Megaphone, Libsyn, Buzzsprout, whatever, most of these platforms have a featured ad platform, meaning you go on the platform and you say, hey, I want to put ads on my episodes. Which advertisers do you have? And it will generally be very generic and mass market ads, right? Like Athletic Greens or whatever it is. The thing here is you want to match your audience with an ideal product. And advertising doesn't really do this because they are aiming for mass market. So first of all, it might not be super relevant for your podcast. And on top of that, you will get paid very little. The typical range that we are looking at is $10 to $25 CPM, which is cost per mil, which is $10 to $25 for every 1,000 downloads the ad gets in front of. Not fantastic and definitely not very profitable to you unless you have hundreds of thousands of downloads, if not millions of downloads. But that's the first way to monetize the podcast, and the advantage of it is it's very easy. Anybody with a podcast can do it as long as you qualify, which is a certain length of episodes and it not being too much on a sensitive topic. That's it. Second way to monetize a podcast is subscription based. So here think about Patreon, think about Buzzsprout subscription, think about Apple Podcast subscription, buy me a coffee. Basically it's saying to the audience, hey, look, all the podcast is for free, of course. If you want to support the show, you can subscribe to my monthly Patreon. And by the way, if you do so, you will have exclusive content, potentially the podcast without any ads, or additional content like an exclusive episode each and every month, or even office hour with me, and we can talk and we can have a chat and direct access with me. This can be of high value actually. This is much more interesting than ads in my opinion, because first of all, it's your product. So people are much more likely to engage with this. Second thing is it creates a community, right? So you are creating a community of like-minded people and of people who listen to your podcast who you know belong within your niche. The inconvenience of this is it takes lots of members to actually make a good living out of this, and it takes additional work to do that on top of it. And what you need to manage then is churn, because you might have some people engaging and like buying in the Patreon, but they will stop paying after a small period of time. So the whole challenge here is to say, how do we keep people as long as possible, and or how do we add as many as possible each and every month, which means you need a fast-growing podcast. Third way to monetize a podcast, and here we start entering into the interesting ones in my opinion, is sponsorship. Sponsorship is basically saying, okay, I don't want to do random ads, I want partners. I want to match my audience with a product or brand that I believe in, that I trust. Typically, this means multiple things. You will look for a product or a brand for whom your audience is the ideal client of. And in those scenarios, brands are typically willing to pay much more than $10 to $25 CPM because they are talking directly to their ideal audience. And this is what you want to be happening. So sponsorship can be very, very interesting. And back to my very first point in this video, the more niche you are, the better. Because if you are capable of saying, hey, I have this very narrow audience of people of more than 60 years old who love pickleball and who live in South Africa and who also happen to do yoga, going completely on the random thing here is, but anybody anybody who is interested into that specific avatar will be willing to pay a lot of money to be featured on your podcast, because this is exactly who they want to be in front of. They don't have to go mass market to try that 0.1% will convert, but they know that this is the ideal audience. So sponsorship, very, very interesting, especially if you have a niche audience. And here, what you can typically expect is 200 to 300 CPM, depending on how well you negotiate. And we even have clients who go up to $1, $2 to $3 per downloads, meaning a $3,000 CPM. And here it becomes much more interesting because you don't need 100,000 downloads per month. You just need the right amount of downloads in a very specific niche. And the fourth way to monetize your podcast, which is a bit specific, it is having your own product or service to sell. And this is by far the best one, because think about it. Sponsorship means you will be part of the marketing budget, right? You will be part of the margin. Subscription-based model, you will need to come up with additional content. You will also need to nurture, and you will have a churn issue. Plus, usually it's a very low ticket, and ads, all the reasons that we mentioned before. Your own product is something that people will much more likely trust, right? Because it's you, they're listening to you after all, so they have a much higher likelihood to engaging with you. And it is within your margin. Like, you are directly cutting the third party here by having another brand sell their products and capturing a bit of value out of this. You are selling your own stuff, much more likely for people to engage, much higher margin, and you own the delivery. So you make sure that people keep that trust and still consider you as the authority. Now, not everybody has their company, so that's why it's not the option that everybody should go for. If you don't have your own company or your own product, you should for sure go for sponsorships. Now, before finishing this video, I want to quickly talk about merch, because a lot of podcasters do merch. But again, if you think about it, this will be probably for people showing support, right, and wanting to help you out. But at the end of the day, the likelihood of making a good business out of selling merch is very, very low, because what matters to people is how much value they get out of this. And then it's a matter of conversion rate, right? So if you don't have enough downloads to get good sponsorships, you're probably not gonna have enough downloads to make lots of money through merch. So I wouldn't typically recommend merch, because that's an additional call to action that you put into the podcast and towards the audience, being like, hey, buy my stuff, without you making a lot of money out of it, and then most likely not getting lots of value. If you implement all the steps that I just mentioned to grow your podcast, and then you go for sponsorship, in rare cases, we could go for advertising or subscription-based model, you will have a growing podcast that makes money and possibly transform your life. So stop waiting and go ahead.